Have you ever noticed that strange moment when an empath, someone who's always been kind, accommodating, and sensitive to everyone else's needs, suddenly transforms into someone completely unrecognizable? That moment when their usual warmth gives way to a cold, unflinching clarity that terrifies everyone around them. What you're witnessing isn't a breakdown or a personality disorder. It's something far more profound and rarely discussed: the awakening of the empath's shadow self. In his later, more controversial research that was largely kept from public view, Carl Jung documented a specific 5-stage transformation that occurs when an empath's repressed shadow finally emerges. This isn't just another self-help concept. It's a fundamental restructuring of the empath's entire psyche that Jung observed repeatedly in his clinical practice, but hesitated to publish widely due to its potentially destabilizing implications. The insights I'm about to share could completely transform how you understand yourself and your darkest moments. Moments you've probably been ashamed of or tried to suppress. If you've ever found yourself wondering, "What happened to me? Why did I suddenly become someone I didn't recognize?" This revelation might be the missing piece you've been searching for. Before we dive deeper, make sure you're subscribed to our channel and have notifications turned on. This video is part of our series exploring the hidden dimensions of empathic psychology, and you won't want to miss what comes next. And if you're looking to go even deeper into these transformative insights, check out our membership community, where we provide exclusive content and guided practices. The link is in the description below. The awakening of an empath's shadow self follows a remarkably consistent pattern that Jung documented through careful observation of his patients. This pattern isn't random or chaotic. It's a structured transformation that moves through 5 distinct stages, each with its own psychological challenges and revelations. Understanding this map can help empaths navigate what is often a terrifying and isolating experience without pathologizing what is actually a natural and necessary evolution. The first stage is what Jung called the provocation. This is the triggering event or final straw that pushes the empath's shadow to break through the carefully constructed conscious personality. What's fascinating about this stage isn't the external event itself, which can sometimes seem relatively minor to observers. Rather, it's the internal threshold that's finally crossed after years, often decades, of accumulated boundary violations, invalidation, and emotional exploitation. For most empaths, the provocation occurs after a prolonged period of giving beyond their means, suppressing their own needs, and maintaining harmony at the expense of their authenticity. The conscious mind has been rigidly controlling the personality, enforcing the empath's role as the peacekeeper, the supporter, the emotional caretaker. But beneath this conscious control, the shadow, containing all the repressed anger, resentment, and self-protective instincts, has been growing stronger. Jung noted that the provocation often involves a situation where the empath's core values are violated in a way that can no longer be rationalized or accommodated. It creates what he called a psychic earthquake, a rupture between the conscious self-image and the rising pressure from the shadow. This rupture is experienced as a sudden, overwhelming surge of emotions that the empath has typically denied themselves permission to feel: rage, indignation, even hatred. Have you experienced this moment? Perhaps you remember a specific incident where something inside you simply snapped, where your usual response of understanding, forgiveness, and accommodation was suddenly replaced by an ice-cold clarity and a voice inside you that said, "No, not one step further." This wasn't a failure of your empathic nature. It was the necessary activation of parts of yourself that you've been suppressing in order to maintain your empathic identity. Jung observed something particularly interesting about the provocation. It often occurs not at the worst offense, but when the empath is actually beginning to strengthen and reclaim their personal power. It's as if the growing strength of the authentic self creates the conditions for the shadow to finally break through the weakening barriers of the false self. This timing explains why many empaths experience this awakening not at their lowest point, but paradoxically when things appear to be improving. In his clinical notes, Jung documented specific physical sensations that often accompany the provocation. Many empaths report a rush of heat or energy moving up their spine, an unusual clarity of perception where colors seem brighter and sounds more distinct, or a sensation of pressure releasing in their chest or throat. These physiological responses signal that the body itself is participating in this psychic revolution, the mind-body connection manifesting the internal shift in tangible, physical ways. The provocation is rarely a clean or dignified event. Jung observed that it often involves behavior that the empath later feels ashamed of, shouting, saying cutting things they can't take back, walking out, or making sudden decisions that shock everyone in their life. This apparent loss of control is actually the first emergence of authentic expression after years of excessive control. Like water bursting through a dam, this initial release can be messy and overwhelming before it finds a more balanced flow. What makes this stage particularly disorienting is that most empaths have built their identity around being different from those who've hurt them. They pride themselves on never raising their voice, never being selfish, never putting their needs first. When the provocation brings forth exactly these behaviors, it creates a profound identity crisis. Am I becoming just like them? Becomes a terrifying question that leads directly into the second stage. The second stage of this transformation is what Jung termed the dark night of the ego. This is perhaps the most misunderstood and feared phase of the shadow's awakening. During this stage, the empath experiences a profound identity crisis as the carefully constructed self-image, often built around being the good one, the helpful one, or the understanding one, begins to disintegrate. Jung documented that this stage typically involves intense psychological distress. The empath may experience episodes of uncharacteristic behavior, cutting remarks they never thought themselves capable of, boundaries enforced with an intensity that shocks everyone, including themselves, or the sudden termination of relationships they've invested years in maintaining. What's happening beneath the surface is a fundamental reconfiguration of the psyche. The shadow, containing all the repressed aspects of the self, is flooding the conscious mind with content that directly contradicts the empath's cultivated self-image. The parts of themselves they've disowned, their anger, their selfish desires, their capacity for judgment and discernment, are suddenly demanding acknowledgement and integration. During this stage, many empaths fear they're becoming just like the very people who have hurt them, narcissistic, cold, uncaring. This fear creates tremendous internal conflict, often leading to cycles of assertive boundary setting, followed by overwhelming guilt and self-doubt. Jung noted that this pendulum swing is both natural and necessary. It's the psyche attempting to find a new equilibrium that incorporates both the conscious personality and the emerging shadow material. What makes this stage so disorienting is that the empath is experiencing aspects of themselves they've never consciously identified with. If you're in this stage or have passed through it, you might remember thinking thoughts like, "This isn't me, I don't recognize myself anymore," or "I'm turning into a monster." Jung observed that these thoughts are actually a positive sign. They indicate that integration is beginning. The conscious mind is witnessing the shadow rather than remaining fully identified with either the old self-image or the emerging shadow content. The dark night of the ego is characterized by what Jung called shadow possession, periods where the repressed material temporarily takes over the personality. During these episodes, the empath might say things they later regret, make impulsive decisions, or behave in ways that seem entirely out of character. These episodes are typically triggered by situations that resonate with past wounds or boundary violations. What's crucial to understand about this stage is that it represents not a failure of the empath's development, but a necessary phase of it. Jung compared it to the alchemical process of dissolution, where existing structures must break down before new, more integrated ones can form. The apparent chaos and instability of this period are actually signs of profound psychological reorganization. During the dark night of the ego, many empaths experience what Jung called shadow dreams, dreams where they behave in violent, selfish, or otherwise unacceptable ways. These dreams often cause significant distress, but Jung saw them as the psyche's attempt to familiarize the conscious mind with disowned aspects of the self. Rather than predictions of future behavior, these dreams are introducing parts of the self that need acknowledgement and integration. This stage also brings a phenomenon Jung called shadow projection reclamation. Before the shadow awakening, empaths typically project their disowned qualities onto others, seeing out there what they cannot acknowledge in here. During the dark night, these projections begin to return home. The empath starts to recognize their own capacity for the behaviors they've judged in others, not because they're just as bad, but because they're fully human, containing the entire spectrum of human capabilities and impulses. The length and intensity of this stage vary widely between individuals. For some empaths, the dark night lasts for months. For others, it can extend for years. Jung observed that the duration often correlates with how rigid the previous ego structure was and how much shadow material was repressed. The more severely the empath denied their full humanity, the more turbulent this stage tends to be. The third stage brings a crucial shift in the transformation process. Jung called this stage the confrontation with the predator. During this phase, the empath begins to recognize and directly engage with what Jung termed the inner predator, the part of themselves capable of discernment, judgment, and, when necessary, emotional or relational violence. This stage involves a profound reorientation to power. Where the empath previously rejected or feared their own capacity for power, often projecting it onto others and then feeling victimized by it, they now begin to reclaim this energy as a necessary aspect of their wholeness. This is not about becoming domineering or manipulative. It's about acknowledging that healthy psychological functioning includes the capacity to protect oneself, to judge what is safe and what isn't, and to act decisively from that judgment. Jung noted that during this stage, empaths often experience what he called predator dreams, dreams in which they encounter dangerous animals or threatening figures. Initially, they may run from these figures or be victimized by them in the dreams. As integration progresses, the dreams shift. The empath may find themselves fighting back, making peace with the predator, or even discovering that they themselves can transform into the powerful figure when necessary. In waking life, this stage manifests as a new relationship with conflict. The empath, who previously avoided confrontation at all costs, may find themselves initiating difficult conversations, expressing unpopular opinions, or setting boundaries that create discomfort in others. There's a new willingness to be disliked, misunderstood, or rejected rather than compromise their truth. What Jung found particularly significant about this stage was the paradoxical effect it has on the empath's relationships. While some relationships naturally fall away, particularly those that were based on the empath's previous self-sacrifice, many relationships actually deepen. The authenticity that comes with shadow integration creates the possibility for more genuine connection than was possible when the empath was presenting only their acceptable qualities. The confrontation with the predator brings what Jung called the reclamation of healthy aggression. Many empaths have been taught to view all aggression as destructive or harmful, but Jung distinguished between destructive aggression and vital aggression. Vital aggression is the life-affirming energy that allows us to set boundaries, protect what we value, and move toward our goals despite obstacles. This form of aggression is essential to psychological health and empowerment. During this stage, empaths often experience a surge of energy and clarity. The vital force that was previously suppressed is now available, creating a sense of capacity and agency that may feel entirely new. Physical symptoms that were present during periods of excessive accommodation, fatigue, pain, digestive issues often begin to resolve as the body responds to this more balanced psychological state. Jung observed that this stage brings what he called the end of false forgiveness. Many empaths have used premature forgiveness as a way to bypass their authentic emotional responses to violation or betrayal. During the confrontation with the predator, they discover the difference between authentic forgiveness that flows from a position of strength and processed emotion and false forgiveness that's really a form of self-abandonment aimed at maintaining harmony at all costs. This stage also involves what Jung termed the differentiation of empathy. Where the empath previously experienced empathy as a form of emotional merger that often left them vulnerable to manipulation, they now develop a more differentiated form of empathy that allows them to understand others' experiences without taking responsibility for them. This mature empathy includes the crucial recognition that sometimes the most empathic response is setting a firm boundary or walking away entirely. The fourth stage brings a dramatic shift in the empath's inner experience. Jung called this the alchemical wedding, the stage where conscious integration of the shadow begins in earnest. The war between the old self-image and the emerging shadow material gives way to a process of negotiation, collaboration, and eventually, union. During this stage, empaths often report a sense of internal spaciousness, as if there's suddenly room for all aspects of their experience. The rigid categories of acceptable and unacceptable qualities begin to dissolve. Anger, selfishness, judgment, and power are no longer seen as contradictions to empathy and compassion, but as necessary complements that create a fuller, more authentic humanity. Jung noted that this stage is marked by significant dream symbolism involving marriage, sexual union, or the integration of opposing forces. In waking life, the empath experiences fewer episodes of extreme pendulum swings between the old accommodating self and the reactive shadow self. In their place comes a new capacity to respond flexibly to situations, drawing on different aspects of the self as needed. This stage brings what Jung called the end of projection. The empath stops projecting their disowned qualities onto others and takes responsibility for the full spectrum of their humanity. The person who previously could only see others as narcissistic, while identifying themselves as purely empathic, now recognizes that all humans contain both self-centered and other-centered impulses. This recognition doesn't excuse abuse or manipulation, but it does bring a more nuanced understanding of human psychology. What makes this stage particularly powerful is the access it provides to previously unavailable internal resources. The empath who has integrated their shadow doesn't lose their empathic gifts, quite the opposite. Their empathy becomes more discerning, more boundaried, and ultimately more effective because it's no longer contaminated by unconscious needs for approval or conflict avoidance. The alchemical wedding brings what Jung called the sacred marriage of opposites. D. The empath discovers that seemingly contradictory qualities, strength and vulnerability, boundaries and openness, discernment and compassion, can coexist and actually enhance each other. This integration creates a psychological flexibility that wasn't possible when the empath was identified exclusively with their light qualities and rejecting their dark ones. During this stage, empaths often experience what Jung termed the rebirth of play. The serious, responsible empath who was always focused on others' needs rediscovers a capacity for lightness, humor, and spontaneity. This playfulness isn't frivolous. It's a sign of genuine psychological freedom and the reduced burden that comes from no longer carrying the weight of an idealized self-image. Jung observed that the alchemical wedding brings a profound shift in the empath's relationship with their own needs and desires. Where they previously viewed their needs as inconvenient obstacles to serving others, they now recognize that honoring their own requirements is the foundation for sustainable connection with others. Self-care transforms from a guilt-inducing necessity to a natural expression of self-respect. This stage also involves what Jung called the integration of the inner manipulator. Just as the empath has disowned their capacity for healthy self-protection and boundary setting, they've often disowned their capacity for strategic influence. During this stage, they reclaim the ability to consciously shape their environment and relationships rather than simply adapting to external demands. This isn't about becoming manipulative in the negative sense, but about acknowledging their right to create conditions that support their well-being. The fifth and final stage of the Shadow's awakening is what Jung termed the return with the elixir. This name references the hero's journey, in which the protagonist returns from their ordeal, carrying something of value for their community. In the case of the empath's transformation, the elixir is their newly integrated authentic self and the wisdom gained through their shadow work. During this stage, the empath experiences what Jung called the transcendent function, the capacity to hold opposing qualities in creative tension without needing to resolve them into a single position. The either-or thinking that once dominated their psychology, either I'm completely selfless or I'm selfish, either I'm kind or I'm angry, gives way to both, and thinking that embraces life's inherent complexity. This shift has profound implications for the empath's relationship with themselves and others. Where they once needed external validation to feel worthy, they now experience an unshakable inner knowing of their value. Where they once feared their darker impulses, they now recognize these energies as vital aspects of their wholeness when consciously integrated and appropriately expressed. Jung observed that empaths who reach this stage often discover a new sense of purpose that emerges organically from their transformation. Having integrated their own shadow, they develop a natural capacity to guide others through similar terrain. This isn't something they pursue out of obligation or a need to be needed. It flows naturally from their authentic presence and hard-won wisdom. The return with the elixir brings what Jung called natural authority, a form of influence that comes not from domination or manipulation, but from embodied authenticity. The integrated empath no longer needs to convince others or prove themselves. Their presence itself carries a weight and impact that naturally influences their environment without forceful assertion. This stage is characterized by what Jung termed the end of self-sabotage. Before shadow integration, many empaths unconsciously undermine their own efforts at setting boundaries or prioritizing their needs. Once the shadow is integrated, this internal opposition dissolves. The parts of the self that were previously at war now work in concert, creating an unusual level of internal harmony and effectiveness. Jung noted that the return with the elixir brings a phenomenon he called magnetized authenticity. The integrated empath naturally attracts relationships and opportunities that match their authentic nature, while situations and connections that would require them to compromise their integrity seem to naturally fall away. This isn't a magical process, but the result of clear signals the empath now sends about who they are and what they will engage with. This stage also involves what Jung called embodied wisdom, the integration of psychological insights into the empath's lived experience. The understanding that was initially intellectual becomes embedded in their being, influencing their responses without conscious deliberation. This embodied wisdom creates a natural grace in navigating complex human dynamics that once would have been overwhelming. The empath at this stage embodies what Jung called wounded wholeness, not a perfect or ideal state, but a dynamic integration that includes both light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, boundaries and openness. This integration creates a magnetic authenticity that others respond to, often without knowing exactly why. The empath becomes a living example of the possibility of transformation through embracing one's complete humanity. Jung's research on these 5 stages offers a profound reframing of the empath's journey. What is typically seen as a liability, their sensitivity, their openness, their capacity to feel others' emotions, becomes the foundation for an extraordinary psychological evolution when the shadow is consciously integrated. The very qualities that made the empath vulnerable to exploitation become their greatest strengths when balanced by the healthy expression of their shadow aspects. This transformation process is not about the empath becoming less empathic. It's about their empathy becoming more discerning, more boundaried, and ultimately more powerful because it's no longer constrained by an idealized self-image that rejects essential aspects of human experience. The integrated empath doesn't lose their capacity to feel deeply and connect authentically. They enhance it by including the full spectrum of their humanity. What's particularly significant about Jung's research on this 5-stage process is how it reframes what many empaths experience as their greatest shame, their dark moments or breaking points, as actually crucial turning points in their psychological development. The moments when the empath seems to become unempathic are not failures, but necessary ruptures that allow for greater wholeness. Jung's understanding of this process was considered potentially dangerous in his time because it challenged the prevailing cultural narrative that empathy meant perpetual self-sacrifice and accommodation. By documenting how the healthiest empaths ultimately integrate their shadow, including their capacity for anger, judgment, and power, Jung was directly challenging the social structures that benefit from empaths remaining in a state of unconscious self-abandonment. As you reflect on these 5 stages, consider where you might be in this journey. Have you experienced the provocation, that moment when something inside you finally said, "Enough"? Are you currently in the dark night of the ego, grappling with a self-image in dissolution? Have you begun the confrontation with the predator, reclaiming your capacity for discernment and self-protection? Are you experiencing the alchemical wedding, finding a new integration between opposing aspects of yourself? Or have you reached the return with the elixir, embodying your authentic wholeness in a way that naturally inspires others? Wherever you are in this process, know that you're not alone. The awakening of the empath's shadow self is not a deviation from your empathic nature, but the necessary completion of it. True empathy, the kind that can sustain itself and create genuine healing, must include the full spectrum of human experience, both light and shadow. I invite you to share your reflections on these stages in the comments below. Where do you recognize yourself in this journey? What has been most challenging or surprising about your own shadow's awakening? Your story might be exactly what another empath needs to hear to make sense of their own experience. And if you're seeking deeper guidance on navigating these 5 stages, consider joining our membership community, where we offer specific practices and support for each phase of this transformation. The link is in the description. Remember, what feels like your darkness becoming unbearable is often the beginning of your most profound transformation. The shadow awakens not to destroy your empathic gifts, but to make them sustainable, authentic, and truly powerful.